So we had a few more people join. Welcome aboard, everybody. We have a nice crowd this morning.
Yeah.
It's great to see everybody. Thanks for sharing your time with us. Again, I'm Tim Healy. There's a resemblance here in the head and the thumbs up. That's me. Brian Cohen, to the people who've just joined us. So this is part two in the three-part series here at the Miller Place Business Center. Today's all about the art of the interview, right? As I said earlier, don't ask any technical questions. I know none of that. I have an engineer. I'm not good at any of that.
Same category.
Yeah,
Most of the time, I'm just holding up the phone, going that way. I do some of the stuff from home. Started using it over here, too. But that's it. It's like, turn on the camera, and go.
Oh, the resources here that I don't know the resources here yet, but I've heard of them.
Yeah.
And it's a tremendous resource.
Yeah,
to
it's
have.
great. Totally complimentary.
So keep that in
I hate
mind.
using the word free. It's complimentary,
Did I say the word free? Did
No.
I? Oh, okay.
It's not even tax dollars.
The Profit Express, we don't use the word free too often. I mean,
No. Mine, actually, you do.
All right.
So I started a podcast, Passionate Careers, and how do you separate yourself? Call it I Know Brian. Yeah, that kind of thing. So what I'm looking to do, and this goes back to what you're talking about with the welding kind of a thing, is to talk about, is to aim that show down to the high school level. I want to get the high school kids to see this thing about what it is that you're passionate about and how a career can come to the whole thing. So that's my aspect of it. So I'm looking to deliver a message out there. And some of you are looking to deliver a message out there. Tim's a little different, on that side. The focus of your program is obviously about sales, Profit Express. So you got a different aspect of it.
It started in 2008 as a radio show on 88.7 FM WRHU, which is Hofstra's signal. And I took that until 2020 when that thing called the pandemic came and kind of shut things down. At that point, I decided to go straight podcast. So as of last week, I did episode 574. So it's, it adds up after a while. And my focus is helping small business owners win the battle for business each and every week. Because that's what business is, that's what sales is. That's the focus of my show. And again, we want to kind of get a sense of who's in our audience today with the kinds of podcasts you folks are considering putting together. I heard a few niche ideas,
right?
Like, women in men's spaces, women entrepreneurs in men-dominated industries. I'll just speak on this briefly. It's great if you have a very niched, focused topic. Because part of my challenge when I started in 2008, podcasts were barely a thing. Okay, I was all radio. And there's I don't know the stats, but the number of podcasts out there is just mind-blowing, okay? And there's just a lot of noise out there. And I do have a bit of a broader topic, small business sales and marketing. There's a lot of people in my space. But like you have a database of 5,000 people in this motorcycle community. It doesn't have to be a huge audience, but if you can connect to your audience with a really good specific topic, they could be a very loyal audience and a very valuable audience. Okay, so that's great, and as a little bit of a sidebar. So we got people who are thinking of having podcasts, creating podcasts, or interested in it. The one thing that my general manager, Bruce Avery, may he rest in peace, said when I started in 2008, he's like, anybody can do a show. Anybody can do 5 shows, 10 shows. Are you going to do one every week? Do you have the content to do one every week? Think about that. So 580 shows later, he was right. It's not easy, okay? But today what I want to focus on, Brian and I will focus on, interestingly enough, very different approaches to the interview.
Yeah.
And you'll see my approach and Brian's approach, and that what's makes it valuable today is you have the podcast, you have your topic, you have your theme. Now it's about the interview. So I'll kind of have this as a focal point for today. But again, it's about a conversation.
Right. And the interview. So is it a prepared interview? Do you know who your guest is? Or you don't know who your guest is? And I'll go through the you don't know. So my world of interviewing is a little bit different in his respect, and the rest of the thing. So how do you find, I'll go with mine, right? Let me just start with that because it's much simpler. A lot of the interviews I've done were at trade shows, business expos, and things like that. So I'm basically being walked around. I have a young lady that pulls me around that attended these things, and she would bring me over to the next table to interview. I would read whatever the banner is, whatever material I have over there, and say, hey, you're with Tell me about it. I have no idea if they're going to be long, short, they're going to answer anything or not. I do know that they're going to be on camera. That side of it, has been looked at and that kind of thing. So I don't know. He knows there's an advantage of that. He knows who he's going to interview, and he's got a different goal, I should say, or a different level of expectation that goes along with it, right? My level of expectation is just a quick little interview. You're a different story. So some of the folks that Tim has interviewed, George Foreman, Mike Rowe, stuff like that. It's not just, hey, pick up the phone, get on the phone, all of a sudden we're going to interview you. You got to prepare for it, and that's important.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's Brian is excellent at the impromptu interview, where I guess this is my personality. I'm more structured. I'm the research guy. Brian's not. He's, well, no offense. But in a good way. It's not easy to have an impromptu conversation, and he's very, very good at that. You can kind of go both ways. But one thing I want to consider, if you talk about putting an interview together, what podcast do you enjoy? Okay, just start to, I mean, you don't have to answer. If you want to answer it, great. Who's your favorite podcast or interviewer?
This is where someone says Tim, okay? Tim.
Well, it'd be nice if they answer. That's okay.
All right.
But why do you listen? So think of it, before you construct an interview, think of it as you're the audience, very simply. What shows do you enjoy and why do you enjoy them? So who's their favorite show out there? Who's got somebody that they love listening to, watching? Who is it?
This American Life.
This American Life, okay.
Because I love it because it's like storytelling, really. It's got a theme, and then it has like 3 different chapters, but they're all unique, but they all tie together to the same topic. Like the other one the other day was Stuck in the Middle, and it had very different illustrations of what it's like to be stuck in the middle. And I just think it's very engaging.
So it's called This American Life?
This American Life.
So your name was, I'm sorry?
Deborah.
Deborah. So you see what Deborah was able to do as a fan of the show? This American Life, storytelling, has a theme, 3 parts, right? That's basic. Wow. She's not producing the show. She's not, the host of the show. She's just a fan of the show. And the reason I highlight that is because the show does a very good job of presenting their format. And you know it, and you're engaged by it, and you follow it. So who else has a favorite show or interviewer? There was another hand up here a moment ago.
Oh, I really like Dave Ramsey's show.
Dave Ramsey. Well, okay.
It talks about finance, but even if you're in finance, he always brings out some other things that you're like, oh, I never looked at it from that angle before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the way he talks to whomever comes on the show, and he brings out things out of them that maybe they didn't want to discuss, or maybe it's another broker he's interviewing. He cross-references things. I really like that about his show. Yeah.
That was a great point that you just mentioned. He brings things out of people. Think about that. So what I was always told, what makes a great interview is if you're listening to an interview and you're in your car, you're jogging, whatever, whether it's radio, whether it's podcast, if the host asks a question that you want to ask as you're listening, has anybody ever done that? They're listening to an interview. It's like, oh, I want to know something about or this. And then all of a sudden, the host asks the question. That's a great interview. Okay. Any other favorite shows, favorite interviewers? No? Okay. So again, it helps kind of get a sense of, okay, this is the show I love and why do I love it? As we're looking to maybe put together our own shows. So what makes a great interview? They have to deliver, right? So Brian and I have to deliver today. Why? Because you're all giving your time this morning. So if we bomb and we suck, well, that's a possibility.
There's soundbite number 1.
Right, okay. Oh, yeah, the microphone on.
Yeah.
So, no, but we have to deliver. Why? Because you're sharing your greatest resource with us, your time. Okay, so in a seminar setting, it's true, and in an interview. Somebody wants to tune in, somebody wants to download a podcast, they're sharing time. You got to deliver. So it's either going to be, you're going to entertain, you're going to educate, or you're going to inspire. Think about it. With your show, which one is it for you?
Entertain, but sometimes educate. sometimes inspired. Like, it could
They-
be all of them,
it
depends
could-
on the one.
It could be all.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if you don't, if you don't deliver, are they going to listen? Right? I mean, it's that simple. That simple.
Here was one of the things Tim had mentioned to me too. It's like, if the guest is boring you, guaranteed the audience is being bored by it also. You just got to change it up. And it's challenging sometimes, to flip it around a little bit. I can't imagine, you get like a George Foreman on there and he's like, hey, you're boring me, that's it, and interview's over. But it is important to do that. So you got to spice up the interview somehow. Ask a challenging question or something like that, a bit unexpected to keep it interesting. I did one, and I knew who the guest was. I was doing a half-hour podcast, and it was about success. So it was very, very general, a little too general at the time. But the guest I had asked if they could send me questions in advance. I was like, sure, that's fine. Makes my life a little bit easier. I'll never do that again. Never, ever, ever do that again. Having an idea where you want to take the show and where they want to take the show and kind of topics you want to discuss, all well and good. This way it's structured, in that respect, and you know what you want to accomplish, and the show stays true to what it is. But on that boring side of life, is that if somebody's going to give you questions that you want to have, that they want to have asked to them, that means they've got responses that they know, word for word, no. And if it gets read back to you on the whole thing, it's not good. Ugh. Right. And you've heard those. So having a conversation with your guest is going to be really important. So that's why I stay away from those questions in advance, no matter what I've been doing. To stay away from that.
That's actually an excellent point.
That's soundbite number 2.
No, you jumped the slide. No, that was good. Here's the thing. So I've dealt with a lot of publicists, right? And what's their job? Their job is to promote their client. It's an author, it's whomever. And they'll often ask for questions in advance. And I'm like, yeah, no. Because what's going to happen is, you just said, they may just be prepared for those questions. And then it kills the conversation. Because what I didn't get to yet is, what is a great interview? And let me throw that question out to you guys. What is a great interview? What do you think?
Conversation.
Boom! The man in the back. Thank you very much. Perfect. Great interview is a great conversation. And if you get scripted, if you give people questions in advance, it will not be a great conversation. So, my opinion, do not send questions in advance. And if you do get a big guest, because sometimes if you want the name and the publicist is like, well, we got to have some questions, give them a couple and make them more generic. Just satisfy them, but don't give them your real questions. That's my thought there. The guest, here's an important one. If the guest doesn't excite you, it's not going to excite your audience. And plus, if the guest doesn't excite you, you're not going to be excited to interview that person. You'll probably do less research. You probably will not come up with as many good questions. So they don't excite you, they're not going to excite the audience.
So how do you figure that out, right? How do you go about guests? Like, I do a trade show and I'm walking around, I go table to table, whatever. The guest is whomever it is, that's standing in front of me. I'm looking to accomplish interviewing everybody, that's there. But when it comes to getting a guest, now you're reaching out to publicists, or publicists are reaching out to you, for that. I'm looking for interesting stories that are out there. And a lot of times I'm looking outward, not so much as waiting for you to contact me. Occasionally yes, occasionally no. But a lot of times, if the guest is contacting me, a potential guest is contacting me, that means they've got some agenda out there. If the agenda fits, all well and good. If you reached out to me about that whole thing about careers, good, that's all well and good. If it's some other things that, you just want to sell something, I couldn't care less. Maybe he does, but, but I don't even think that's the case either. If somebody's looking to sell something, I don't think so. So how do you research a guest? What's your approach to that?
Well, let me get back to the sell thing. Again, I'm in the Profit Express. It's sales, marketing, small business. I mean, that's certainly the focus. But if somebody comes on to hawk a product, again, it's going to be a crappy interview. And it's audiences can pick it up. Now, I will always promote, like if I have an author on, if I promote it, then it's more genuine. I'll promote the book, how do people get in contact with you, etc. But if they just hawk it and push it, like, I'm tuning in, I'm listening because your topic is interesting, I like your book, I want to learn more about it. So that's a great point. But to the research part of it, so you got to get a guest that excites you, number one, okay? So then you have the guest that you have your eye on to book for the show. Do your research. Research is super easy nowadays, okay? If they're an author, read the book. I've had a lot of authors on the show over the years, okay? Do I read cover to cover? No, I don't always have the time, but I will read big chunks of the book, okay? That's, I would definitely suggest that. And that third point, this one is super important. You have the guest, Bob Jones. Go online, YouTube, whatever it is, find other podcasts that person has done. Because then what you're going to find out very quickly is, how do they sound? Do they have energy? Are they boring? Yeah, I got a good one for that. Are they boring, right? This is critically important. I learned, and I've been doing this, like I said, 2008 I started, and I got kicked. I got the microphone on. I learned a very valuable lesson last year. Publicists came to me with a guy who wrote a book on economics. It was, I'm not going to say who, a very interesting angle on economics. I'm like, this is really, really good. So I was doing some research, but I didn't do the pre-interview call. Timing, busy, etc. Had my question prepared. His other podcasts were, okay, now there's certain realities, okay? I go to a studio, I book time, I pay for that time. I had a guest lined up. Sometimes I gotta roll the dice, because if I cancel, I'm paying for that time anyhow. So I'm like, all right, you know what? I got big energy, I'll get this guy excited. He's on the Profit Express, right? So I have him on, and 5 minutes into it, I'm like, oh God, this sucks. No, it does. We know suck. We know sucky. We know it's no good, right? So I'm like, okay, and I'm trying, and I had a couple of good stories that I picked off. Again, this helps with research. You go to another podcast, the other podcast host asks great questions. You steal one or two, okay? Or it gives you inspiration for another angle. So I heard a few good stories, and I brought those stories up because storytelling, I think you mentioned, right? That's what draws people in. That's what creates a great interview. So I was like, giving him softballs, and he was missing every single one. So it just droned on. I recorded it. I asked my engineer, who's known me for a while, I said, Liam, what do you think? He's like, right? He's like, he was trying to be nice. He's a really sweet kid. I'm like, he was horrible, right? He's like, no, it wasn't that bad. I'm like, dude. He's like, yeah. So for the first time since 2008, because I'm pre-recorded when I was on as a podcast. When I was on radio, I was live. Thank God I was pre-recorded. So I called the publicist. I said, we're not doing the interview. We're not airing it. And the guy was devastated. And he was a very nice guy, super sweet guy. So if they don't excite you, don't have them.
Right.
And if you do the research and you come across other podcasts and they're boring, they're going to be boring on your show. I learned a valuable lesson.
Okay, so not everybody's written a book, right? But it's still the same thing, right? You come to me, it's like, I want to be on the show, whatever. So, all right, so I'm telling you what the show is about, passionate careers. If you're not passionate about what you're doing, and there's some career story that goes along with it, that's it. When I take a look at your LinkedIn page, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, even sometimes TikTok and that kind of stuff, it's like, if you've never posted anything about what it is you do, you're not that passionate about it. You just don't really care. If all you're doing is posting product stuff on there, again, you're out. There's a multitude of different ways of doing research, even if it's just not, a book, or they don't have a publicist or stuff like that. And obviously, if you're starting out for the first time, you're probably not going to reach out, to some big name person along the way either. You're going to reach out to maybe friends or whatever. Be cautious of the friend thing, because if you interview a friend, it's a little tough to call them up and say, hey, that was not that good, You could offer to do it again. You know, if it's recorded, if it's live, there is no do it again. You know, it just is what it is. So make sure you're taking a look at that. If they've done some of the interviews someplace, great. If not, and it really is their first time doing this whole thing, now that pre-interview phone call becomes a real research thing. Talk to them about it. Ask them the kind of questions that, and maybe it's a little bit more prepared at that point in time, right? Because you got to take care of everybody's nerves going into this thing. And I don't edit. It's just, it is what it is and that kind of thing. You know, so you speak to them in advance and let them know, kind of, and make your own notes. One, are they giving you long answers? Are they giving you short answers? If they're giving you short answers, you know, it's going to be much more of a challenge as you're doing something, especially if you're doing a 30-minute interview. If you're doing something for 2 or 3 minutes, then a short answer, you know, is good. Then if they give you long answers, you got to cut that down. But have those real, honest conversations with the guests. If it's folks that you're working with, referrals, whatever it is, you know, and do it that way too. There's multitudes of different ways of doing it. When I was doing mine, it was more people that I knew, and the rest of it, I just found it, and I'll say this like, you know, do recording. I just found it so tiring, you know, to go and speak to the people. It's a half-hour, 45-minute conversation in advance, and then they're on 50 minutes prior to doing it, and then you do the show, and they talk to them afterwards, the rest of that stuff. So if they're really enthusiastic about it, you know, that is time well spent. If they're not that enthusiastic at it, then, you know, then you got to think about what you're doing. So I wound up doing during the pandemic, I wound up doing a half-hour show for 3 years, each weekday by myself. I got bored, you know, with trying to find guests and stuff like that. So it was a different aspect of it.
I begged him to come on. He never had me.
I know. That's not true.
No, okay, I'm kidding.
I'll tell you the story about how I got in the show in the first place and how that got started. But do the research. It's absolutely, positively, unbelievably important. You know, and then the consistency factor too. You got to figure out, you know, how much time you have to get guests. You know, if you got 52,000 people reaching out to you, you still got to filter through that and then kind of work that one through.
Brian, you mentioned something very important. He said he doesn't edit, right? And when I did the radio show, it was live, so I couldn't edit. It was out there, right? Even with my show now, which is pre-recorded, I don't edit it. And I specifically don't, I mean, unless there's been like 1 or 2 instances where something was said and the guest said, would you mind? I'm like, okay, you clean it up. But if you know that you're going to edit your show, you don't let it flow. And it's in your head. This is my opinion.
I agree with you 100%.
Have the conversation. Don't worry about flubs and ums and ahs and this and you know, pregnant pauses. Silence is not good though, okay? But don't worry about perfection. Just have an honest conversation, a conversation that's engaging, and don't think about, tell yourself editing is not an option. I'm not going to edit. Because then I think, in my opinion, you become too uptight. You don't let it flow. So that was a very good point.
Real life example downstairs. So I started using the equipment that's down there. I was doing voiceovers. I do the announcing drag racing out east. I wanted to do something for the sponsors. So I read a 15 to 30 second thing, you know, for each of the sponsors. I knew I was going to do it again. I knew I was going to read it and then reread it, or say it and then re-say it, you know, as I go. And it was in my head. No guest involved, no nothing, no time crunch, no nothing. It was in my head. It's like, I'm going to do it again, so it doesn't matter. Now, if you're interviewing somebody and you just want to go, you know, live with it, whatever, no edit, it does matter. It absolutely does matter. So I'm kind of bad that I had that in my head as I was doing it, but it was in my head, and I was all alone, no pressure with anything. So, great point.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've been talking a lot so far. Questions, thoughts, comments, anything?
So a couple things with the editing and with that super boring guest. So
it's a big topic, the super boring guest.
Yeah. I'm gonna think, you know, shouldn't you prepare the speaker, or couldn't you like take an aside, like 5 minutes into it, you got 20 more minutes to go in the interview, whatever, and the guy's super boring. Couldn't you like, all right, listen, I'm gonna stop for a second. You're slow and boring. Can you get more excited?
Yeah, now that's going to create positive relationship.
No.
Hey, man, you suck. Yeah, step it up a little bit.
You're going to tell them afterward anyway.
Yeah, so here's the thing. So,
okay, so the real question
go ahead.
is preparing the guest for being successful in the interview.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, so there's 2 questions. The first question, preparing the guest. the way I do it, and again, there's, different hosts will do it differently. What I like to do is a pre-interview phone call. Not the day of, but like when you book it. So at least it's a few days or a week in advance, so you also have a chance to back out of it. Like I said, that super boring guest, I had to roll the dice. It was booked, or I was busy. So the pre-interview phone call, I make it an interview that they don't know is an interview. I start really broad. I said, awesome book. So hey, tell me about the title. How'd you come up with the title? Why'd you write the book? Really general, and I let them go. And I know the questions to ask, and just based off of that conversation on the phone, I know if they have energy. I know if they speak well, okay? And when I'm doing that, that's also how I'm preparing with certain specific questions. And I have done this. Again, I don't give the questions in advance because then it's not natural. But with certain guests, they'll mention a sound bite that was great in the pre-interview phone call. And I'll say, whoa, make sure you mention that on the interview. That was great. No, X, whatever it was. So that's how I prepare them, okay? Again, don't give them the questions, but that's my way of vetting them. That, okay, they have good energy, they know their topic, they're enthusiastic. And then I also do other, research other podcasts they've been on. So does that answer that question as far as the pre-research?
Well, as far as like telling them like, hey, we're looking for enthusiasm, don't leave long pauses, put some energy into it, answer real succinctly, don't drag, well, drag is a bad word, but like don't drag your question, don't drag your answers on, don't over-explain.
So some of it actually becomes a little bit of a coaching thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't have a personal relationship with many of the guests in there, right? And you tend to think these folks know what they're doing because they've been on whatever it is. So yeah, giving those kinds of things, letting the guests know, look, it's a half-hour show, you could answer a question for 1 to 2 minutes, that's all well and good. So that gets them away from the one-word response, which if you're doing 30 minutes and you get one-word responses, it's painful.
Yeah,
That's truly painful. So it's a bit of a, depending upon the guest, it's a bit of a coaching session that goes along with it.
Tough.
It's all like how important is it for you to have that person on? That's the question here. How important is it? Now, if I know that I know her, I can't say no because I know her, and that kind of thing. It's a little different. You can say no, but then the importance of that guest becomes a decision.
Yeah, see, but you bring up a great point because, listen, and I one of the slides, I'll jump ahead because I deal with a lot of publicists. Don't trust publicists ever because it's their client. I hope there's no publicist in the room. That's their client. What's their job? To get their client out. And I get it. And I'll ask. I said, how are they, and I stopped asking. Oh, they're great. They're going to be fantastic. They're going to be loving on you. All right, whatever. And then I've had certain guests. And I did ask the publicist of the super boring author. One thing, if you have 2 guests on, one thing I will definitely coach, this is very important, you know this, is not to talk over each other. Okay, it can be hard to have multiple guests on, because when you talk over, we've all heard interviews where multiple guests talk over each other, and it's horrible. So I do coach them on that. I do give a little bit of coaching for, but again, I don't want to have people thinking too much. My goal is always to have a conversation and just to let it flow. And if I give them too much coaching beforehand, if they're not a professional, they're going to start to think. And I don't want you thinking during the interview. I want you talking and responding in an interview,
And also
that's
these
my
folks
approach.
that he's interviewed over there, it's the Profit Express. How did you become profitable? How did you achieve success? If he's got to pull it out of you as to how you achieve what it is, you're not going to be a good guest. You're just not. And that means you don't even care that much, or you don't care as much as you should. So it's not it. It shouldn't be that hard. If it's that hard, let's put it this way. If it's that hard to get the guest to be a good guest, it's not worth doing. It's just not worth doing. Mm-hmm. And if it's a friend that you're talking to, it's like, oh, maybe you should prepare and stuff like that, and a little bit more so. Then it becomes much more coaching, right? Because you have a personal relationship with somebody. But that's not his job. His job is not to coach somebody to be a good guest on something. Go back to the publicist and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Publicist, you better get your guest over there to some communication coach or something like that, because they'll be much better if they came into it with a little bit more enthusiasm. And it's important, if you're going to be the guest on someone's show, to come into it with enthusiasm. You're excited about being on. Hey, Tim, I listened to your show, and if Tim's host, right, I'm guest. I've listened to your show before. Man, some of the interviews you did was great. Now he knows that I listened to his show, and I have an interest in being on that show. And it goes both ways with creating that level of enthusiasm.
Yeah, absolutely. And energy is key, which is enthusiasm. One thing that I do, I don't know if it's the next slide. We're just jumping around, having fun today. And we'll get to it. So I do a good amount of research on my own, okay? And some podcasts go right into its, Mary Jones in her new book, Become a Bookable Speaker, okay? And they do a very quick, short intro. And some people say that's the way to go. What I do is I set the table differently. I'll do an intro of my guest, and there can be anywhere from like a minute and a half to 2 or 3 minutes. And you don't want to go too long on podcasts, but I'm using it as a hook, setting the table. And what happens is, and a lot of my guests, it happened with my most recent guest, who is an author, become a bookable speaker, and I get them pumped up in the intro. And I've had, I don't want to name drop and brag, but like Barbara Corcoran from Shark Tank was one of the ones who, after I did her intro, okay, and she doesn't really need an intro, but I did an intro for her, and she's like, man, after listening to this, it sounds like I really am somebody. So it was just, and she doesn't need warming up. She's 100% professional, obviously. But if you even if you do a 45-second to 60-second intro, get them excited. Because, they're sitting there, whether they're in studio, they're remoting in, they're connecting. I don't know what's going on. I got to draw them in. Yeah.
You said remote. So is it better to do face-to-face, remote? And I was on a conference call the other day, and there was 3 people, only 3 people, and we kept talking over each other.
Yeah.
It was nuts.
Right. Oh, God.
There's no video. So, what is your...
My crazy story on that, it was Blog Talk Radio, right? That's it. So there's no visual, no nothing. It was 4. And I'll never do this one again either. So I was interviewing these folks that made a movie, it was in a movie and stuff like that, and the producer asked if I could have some of the actors on. I was like, yeah, there's 4. 4 people. It was too much. 4 people, all male voices. And it was challenging, because they didn't even know who I was asking the question to. So then I had to spit out, Bob, this one's for you, and all the rest of that. Then it became like a list of questions. So, is it better to do in person? Absolutely it is. Is it realistic to do in person? Sometimes there's no way to do that. And I'll let you answer that one.
Go ahead, yeah.
Because he's done in studio, and with the guest that's in studio or not, there is an advantage from a marketing standpoint to not having them in your studio and having them in their own place. So go ahead, in studio or out of studio? No. And of course, if I'm the guest, it's in studio because...
Yeah, well, listen, if you just wait for in studio, you're going to miss out on a lot of guests. I mean, that's just the reality of it. When I was radio, I had more in studio. Podcasts now, I do more, they're dialing in to the studio. There's a different energy. Look, we have an energy now. If we were doing our presentation on Zoom, would it be the same presentation? No. So it is different. There is a better energy. But again, as long as it's one-on-one, it's easier. You got to be really, as Brian was saying, 4 is crazy. 2 is hard to manage. And then I will do coaching, talking over each other. You can't have that. That's a good question.
Yeah, mine is. I was doing that blog talk thing. It was a big time learning curve, also. And
yeah,
I went
that was the beginning of.
Yeah. And I went into this whole thing as it would be a learning curve. So this pre-interview and all the rest of that stuff. I did none of it. I wanted to improve. Sorry, folks. They were all guinea pigs to me, right? It was like, so I wanted to interview you without knowing who the heck you are. And I was like, because this way it forced me as the host to really, truly be in the moment And to go
Yeah.
figure out the next question based upon what you were saying, you know, and
It's like improv.
it
yeah, no.
absolutely was improv. And then we can go into the, you know, how do you become a better speaker and more confident in the whole thing. And even the intro, when you're introing a speaker, you know, or a guest to be on your show, that's the elevator pitch too. It's the same kind of thing. Could it be longer? Yeah. You know, you get a 30-minute show, you're going to go more than 30 seconds on the whole thing. You know, but if you got a 2-minute thing, you're going 30 seconds or less. That's another elevator pitch. So absolutely important. Everything all ties in together. I've done Tim's show. I've been a guest on his show, and it's easier not to talk over the host if you're sitting in studio because I'm looking at him, you know, and then all of a sudden, you know when he's going to finish the question. And sometimes some people are very, very good at asking a specific question and not saying, oh, and. Once you say, oh, and, everybody's talking over each other. No, so forget that. But I could watch, you know, what he's doing, and then he give you a little nod that you know it's your turn. Or on the flip side of it, and I'll say this on camera too, if you're going a little too long, you get the nod again. It's like, hey, shorten it up there, my friend.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
The proverbial hook. You had a question. I just wanted to get back to you.
Yeah, so if I'm gonna interview somebody, I'm thinking nobody wants to hear me, they wanna hear the person I'm interviewing. So I would have, without knowing, automatically said, oh, thanks for coming on, tell us about it. But based on what you said, it sounds like I should maybe spend a minute and a half or two bragging about, like, talking about those person's achievements so that they don't have to, like, say, oh, I did this and I did that, but use that opportunity to let the audience know some of the achievements that this person has accomplished around the country. Like, are those the type things to talk about them about so that they don't have to mention?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's a few points that you've made that are all very good. They do want to hear the guest more than the host, okay? But don't underestimate yourselves as the hosts, okay? Because, you know, they also want your personality. Because while the guest should be doing more of the talking, it's still a conversation, okay? So you're the host of this. You know, you're driving this. So you have to let your personality come out, okay?
Okay, I wouldn't have thought that, but okay.
No, absolutely. Yeah, you're putting this together. You know, do you have a passion about motorcycles? I mean, you got a Harley hat on and you got a motorcycle I mean, yeah, that's part of your passion. That's part of who you are. So you also have to because you're going to be drawing people in too, because you're going to be part of the draw of the show overall. In regard to my intro, I don't give a laundry list of accomplishments. That's boring. I will pick something interesting that relates to what this guest is on for. So for an example, last week I had this woman on, Krista Haberstock, who's the author of Become a Bookable Speaker. She's a very successful booking agent who books high-end speakers that are getting $10,000, $50,000, $100,000. So my intro was, I'm just going through my head now. All right, so hey, for all my listeners out there who are subject matter experts, trainers, consultants, coaches who are on the platform, okay, have you recently thought maybe your calendar's a bit too light? Have you maybe thought, hey, I'd love to raise my fees, but I just haven't? Well, don't go anywhere. My next guest, Krista Haberstock, is the author of Become a Bookable Speaker, and she's going to take your bookability through the roof. So it's like, why are they listening? Hook. Okay, don't go anywhere. My guest, bang. So I talked about getting booked, raising your fees. I got them.
Okay, so.
Did that not make sense? I'm sorry.
Well, it sounds like there's a commercial involved in that, if you say it that way, right?
But I say it, though, not her.
Okay, right, but now when it's time to talk, do I, like, boast about this person during that minute and a half or so?
No, what you're doing, why should I listen? Why should I listen? And I did this at a live event.
Wait, let me interject 1 second on that. Hold that. I've interrupted.
That
I'm
is
sorry.
the advantage of
I know.
looking at each other. Otherwise, I'm going to talk
You
right over
intro,
that son of a gun.
okay, then ask a question. Because what people don't want to hear, either me, especially the guests, well, you know, I've done this. I've written 5 best-selling books. I've thought that, right? You lose them, right? But if the host hooks them, Okay, wow, this sounds interesting. Oh, I'm a speaker. I want to hear what this author has to say. Then you're asking a question because you don't want her promoting herself. Okay, I get to promote to a certain, because that's also credibility. Why is she on the show? She's an author. That gives everybody certain credibility. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I guess. I'm absorbing.
Okay, all right, fine. All right, go ahead, Brian.
So I look
Sorry.
at that intro as two different things. Why should I listen? Or why should the audience listen? Why should they care? I got XYZ person up here that's about to give a presentation. Why should you care? Well, I'm going to tell you why you should care. And then the other side of it too is to get the guest excited about being on, which they should be already, but to put away all those other distractions. Now, especially if they're in studio, all of a sudden they don't have any other distractions. It's just the studio. You got the cameras there, you got lights, whatever. There's not a whole lot of stuff for them to look at, and it's not their stuff. If you're interviewing somebody and they're at home, maybe the dog's running around, maybe the kids are running
There's been
around,
dog
maybe
barking, yeah.
I didn't put my lunch away, and they got all this stuff, that's floating around their head. So basically, you want to draw the audience in that intro, and you want to make sure you're drawing the guest in, and they're forgetting everything else that's going on.
Yeah.
And when it comes to accomplishments, so a Toastmaster meeting, it was live, the audience was there, and I asked if I could do the intro for one of the speakers. Woman's unbelievably accomplished. She's produced TEDx talks and does a whole bunch of different things. So I asked her, do I have to read this bio? She's like, no, you can do what you want. I said, that's cool. I picked one or two things out of there that she was major accomplishments that the audience would care about. Mm-hmm. Toastmasters, public speaking, TEDx talks, and she coaches people on communication skills. Okay, there's the credibility factor. The rest of it was in my opinion, was who cares? Then the bulk of that interview was, why are you listening? Are you a struggling speaker? Are you looking to accomplish and conquer the world? Well, let me tell you something. This woman has, and I went on, I'll admit it, I probably went on a little too long on that intro.
That's okay.
It happens. You give me, as that goes. But she came back to me, she said, that was one of the best intros she's ever had. Why? Because it wasn't just reading off the laundry list of I've done this, I've done that, and all the rest of that kind of stuff. It was about the audience. That's exactly what this is. There's so many different places for people to go. Why should they listen to you? And it's hard. It's just hard to get people's attention. You go onto any of these systems to go look at podcasts, that title better be spot on. Otherwise, it ain't happening. The Profit Express, what is it about? Making profit? And doing it quickly? Something like that?
I'm getting it now. I had the wrong definition of the intro.
That's okay.
I'm thinking the intro is, okay, I'm going to start interviewing you now, so now let me speak about you before we start. But it's more to the audience.
Right, yes.
So I misunderstood.
I'm sorry, I should have done a better job explaining.
No,
Yes,
me.
that's all right. The intro sets the table. I got to get my audience and my guest excited. Because Brian brought up a great point, especially when you're remote. Some people are in offices, some people are in studios, some people are at home, and there is dog barking. There are distractions. And I've had this happen a bunch. They're in an office and they're doing lights. Because I have my engineer, we're going back and forth, checking sound, checking visual, and they're doing blinds and crap, and there's sun coming through, and they look washed out. So now they're getting distracted. And then when I start, I'm like, hello, welcome to the blah, right? They're like, I don't know where their head is at. So I got to take a minute and a half, bring them back in, get them excited, and then we go.
Yeah, so if you walk down to the studio you have downstairs, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go into the studio. We are now in the studio. You're going to close the door behind you. Hey, then you're going to speak, and you're going to find out that room is kind of soundproof. It's different. In here, we have an echo. You go down there, no more echo. It kind of sets the tone a little bit. There's nothing on the walls. It's all pretty plain. Then you sit down in the chair, and you're right next to a console. You're not sitting next to a refrigerator. You're sitting next to a console over there that's got all the little buttons on there. And the other people can explain what all the buttons are for. I can't. But then you put the headset on. Nothing else in the world matters. Mm-hmm. You can't hear anything else. You can't really see anything else. It's just that. It's so much more difficult to interview somebody when they're at home or in the business because you don't know what's going on outside of the range of that camera.
But I'm sorry, go ahead.
And there is an advantage to interviewing people in other locations.
But the reality is, if you have a show, I would estimate 80% of your guests will be remote, 90% of your guests will be remote. Because you're going to get a really great motorcycle expert, enthusiast, whomever, who's in California. He's not going to fly to, Right, they'll all be remote. So that's something you just, it's the logistics. You just have to be aware of it, and that's a very good point to bring up.
But let me give you that. So what's the advantage of having somebody?
Now, you've had your hand up. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
You stick to a certain, I know, like, okay, once you pick, you're gonna do a podcast every Thursday at 2 o'clock or whatever you pick.
Yep.
Do you also stick to a time? Is it always a half an hour? Sometimes you go over that, an hour? How do you decide that?
Great question. So we've all heard of the Joe Rogan podcast, I'm assuming, whether you like it or not. So he routinely does 2 to 3 hours, right? Every podcast expert says, oh, the attention span is shrinking, which it is. It should be 10 minutes, 15, no more than a half hour. The radio show I had was a solid hour on the clock. What I do at my show is I tell the guest 25 to 30 minutes. What I don't tell them is, if you're good, you go longer. Because if I wrap it at 25 minutes, and oh shit, I wasn't good, right? So to your point, in the beginning, start with a shorter show. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, okay? If you're feeling comfortable, you're gaining confidence, and that only happens with more shows, okay? Then you might extend it. But my rule of thumb with that, again, start simple, but if you have a good conversation, if you are enjoying the conversation, let it go. See, when radio had what was called the clock, I had to end it. I had no choice. But the podcast, and that's part of the great thing about a podcast, is if you have a great conversation, you know, I just let it keep going. Because also what you want to do for promotion, I mean, we're not going to talk about this, are sound bites. Because you don't know when they're going to share something really good. And if it's going well, let it go, and you can get a great clip out of that somewhere. So start small, 10 to 15 minutes, and let it evolve from there.
And my other question is,
Yeah.
do you always do an interview, or is it sometimes just you speaking? How do you decide which way you're gonna go when you wanna start a podcast?
Also an excellent question. That's kind of the format of the show. Will it be an interview format with a guest, or will you just be a talking head, you know, and not to, you know.
I call, my husband always watches the news, and they always call them the talking heads.
Well, that's, you know, they'll have, you know, especially either finance shows or political shows, there are a lot of, you know, it's the host running the show. And that's really what you prefer. That's a lot more work.
To just talk with them.
Yeah, you got to have all the content. You know, honestly, being a host, you know, I got research and questions, and then I riff off of what they tell me. That's easier than, you get, all right, talk for 25 minutes straight on topic, go.
Yeah.
Right?
Go back to my thing. I got bored getting guests, so I just did that. I went for 30 minutes. I went for 30 minutes by myself all the time. Whatever, you know, and I find that pretty easy. I hesitated for jokes. I let that one open for you. You passed on. But why are you doing a show? Let's ask that question. Why are you doing a show? Because you want to share your expertise with somebody, you know, with the world? Then you're most likely going to do it yourself. If you want to share your referral partners and other business associates and talk about the industry, you're going to talk about the construction industry, don't tell me that you're an expert in everything construction. You know, you're not. If you want to talk about, you know, finances and how you approach investing, you know, with people or something like that, well, then it's you talking about how you do it. So then that would be something you would tend to be yourself. Would you go long on that one? It depends on how frequently you want to do things. There was an insurance agent, you know, I spoke to that wanted to do a podcast. I had this conversation. I was like, you know, how often do you plan on doing it? And he couldn't figure that out. And I was like, all right, so do it once a week. How much content do you have? How many things can you talk about? I don't know. So what I made him do is to don't do it yet, but every time a client asked him a question, write down that question. And as soon as he got to 50 questions or so, that became the content. So he did a 2 to 3 minute thing on a weekly basis, and all he did was respond to that question, anonymously, of course, and the rest of it. That became his content. It was really pretty easy.
That's a great strategy, by the way.
Learn that from actually comedy. Judy.
Yeah.
Judy Carter's book of comedy. How do you come up with material to get on a comedy stage? Write everything down.
Yeah.
If you made somebody laugh at some point in time, write it down. You're never going to remember at the end of the day, so don't even think about that, but just write it down. Always carry a notebook with you. It's the same kind of thing. You're looking for content in your area, whatever it is, always carry a notebook. Anytime that you say something interesting or somebody else says something, that's content. But again, if you want to highlight your expertise, and you don't have to go for a half hour, you could go for 2-3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Just like I did the voiceovers over there for those, for those sponsors. Go down there, tape as many of these 2 to 3 minute things as you want to, and then you have them all. Now you got content for the next, couple of months, and put it out every week at a certain time. It's your, Tuesday talk or whatever you'd like to call it, and that becomes that. That becomes easy. Then you would not have a guest. If I was going to have Tim on as a guest on my show, and it's a 5-minute show, ain't happening. That's what he would say for 5 minutes, absolutely nothing.
Oh, I could come up with something.
I know, but I would go for 5 minutes.
I know. How long was that first conversation in the parking lot when it was raining with the duck eggs?
It's funny.
No, let's not go there. No.
It's good, because, so here's the other side of it.
Oh, damn, I shouldn't have brought it up.
No, because, it's important about getting the guest excited about you. And every once in a while, and I was here, and I wanted to make sure that Tim's level of excitement was here, so I brought him a gift, the eggs.
Are these duck eggs or chicken eggs? I was expecting.
Symbolic
Thank you very much.
As that goes. Getting a guest. So the first time I was introduced to Tim, Toastmaster meeting, I didn't know him from a hole in the wall. There was a woman that was a mutual friend. Tim came. I don't even know why you came, but you came.
Mitch Shapiro.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it was somebody else. It wasn't even the woman that walked out of the, had the thing with.
Yeah.
So we're in the parking lot. It's kind of drizzling out there. And a friend of mine, the Toastmaster, gave me a dozen eggs because he had chickens. So we're sitting there.
No, it was ducks.
Duck eggs, right?
Go ahead.
So we're sitting in the... Sitting in the parking lot talking about it. I was like, I'd like to speak to 5,000 people over the course of the year. This guy says, oh, no, why don't you come on the show? What the heck were you thinking? You didn't know me from a hole in the wall.
Yeah, I should have vetted you a lot better than I did. It was a moment of weakness. You gave me eggs, and it was drizzling out. I wanted to get home.
But you got to get the host excited about having you on, especially if you don't know the person or anything like that. If you got some message to deliver. And then you go from there. And it's been absolute multitude of things have happened, from there, because of that. And it's a big, big, big thank you to that.
You're welcome. One thing I want to segue to, some mechanics on the conversation.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So again, a great interview is a great conversation. The gentleman in the back got the answer very good. Thank you, sir. How do you start the conversation? Ask a question, shut up, and listen, right? Now, again, super easy, everybody gets it, okay? But think about those 3 steps. Ask a question, shut up, and listen. You've probably heard of the phrase blank slating. When you ask a question, don't think about what the answer is going to be. When you ask a question, don't think about the next question, okay? Because then you're not listening. And if you have a good guest, they're going to give you something, I promise, that's good. They're going to give you something that you can ask another question off of. I promise, it happens. But you don't get to hear what they're saying and ask those other great follow-up questions if you're not listening. And listening is not the absence of sound. Right? We all blah, 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 right? Listening is listening and hearing what they're saying. And again, it's such an easy thing to say. Ask a question, shut up, and listen.
Here's how you practice that. Forget about the cameras, forget the microphone, everything like that. Go to your next networking event, right? Let them deliver whatever their elevator pitch is. Find a question about that. And then find another question about whatever their response is, whether you care or don't care. Sorry, everybody cares about everybody. But whether you care or don't care, it doesn't make a difference. Make believe you're interviewing that person. They'll be thrilled because you're showing interest in whatever it is that they're doing, and you get a chance to practice thinking and speaking, at the same time. It's those listening skills. Now, and especially if it's somebody that you don't know, an industry you don't know anything about. Going back to how do you be a good guest? You got to ask really interesting questions and think about it, and have faith in yourself, because you are. If you've got a show and your listeners are interested in following your show, that means they have a personality that's somewhat in line with you, and they have an interest that's somewhat in line with you, the rest of that stuff. Trust yourself. You don't have to come into an interview with 10 prepared questions. So when you're at the next networking event, let them deliver their elevator pitch and then ask a couple of follow-up questions with that one based on exactly what they said. You practice doing that.
There's something to Brian's point. All right, we talked about this, phone conversation, questions and answers. Don't trust publicists.
I love that one.
I like that one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Those
Well, you got to talk to my friend.
sons of, all
Oh,
right.
it's unbelievable.
So this is the point that Brian's just making. Always be curious. Because, and you don't fake it, because again, people hear, genuine, okay? People are drawn into hosts for a reason. They connect with them, there's an emotional connection, all right? Always be curious. If you're genuinely curious about the guest, it shows. And if you ask a really good question, it flatters the guest. And like, oh wow, this person, does research. This person knows what they're talking about. Okay, I mean, and if you listen to enough shows, and that's sometimes like the thing with authors, they're on book tours, and book tours are tough because they've spoken about their book 65 times in the last week, okay? And I will never use the questions the publicist gives me because every other host has used the questions the publicist gives them, and I'll get the same questions that everybody else, same answers that everybody else gets. So again, do the research, know what it's about, come up with your own questions, okay, and always be curious. So, oops, let me go back to that. Nah.
I think
Go
that's
ahead.
like one of the most important things. That intro. Has anybody ever read your bio? All right, have somebody read your bio, and you're like, I did that? You get a little bit excited about the whole thing. Now all of a sudden that excitement translates into a better interview if you're being interviewed. So that's a big deal. It also shows that you've paid some, or you've done some research, or you really have a true interest in having somebody on as a guest. Mm-hmm. Because if you can come up with some fact, some thing that they did that's not necessarily in their bio, but it pertains to your show, that's great. I mean, that becomes golden. And then that becomes a follow-up. The first question, something along those lines. Hey, I saw you, gone on to build a multi-million-dollar business, whatever, got 152 employees inside whatever industry, and then you say, and that became a challenge in a challenging environment. And then the first question is like, what in the world, or how did you get the business started? What was the catalyst to get that started? All of a sudden, man, they're in, hook, line, and sinker, and that's what they're thinking about, nothing else.
Mm-hmm. Always be curious, ask a question, shut up and listen. Here's a few interesting techniques to use. And maybe you don't use it right out of the gate, but again, I had a radio consultant I used years ago, Valerie Geller. She's internationally known for, radio and podcast consulting. And I hired her to, help me, help my show and my techniques. And, there's a few things. She's like, never be boring. Okay, as I said earlier, people don't like boring. And when I was on radio, she told me something I'll never forget. And again, I had a live show. And I would book one guest. And she's like, 3 questions in. If they're boring, done. I'm like, what? And I never did it because, again, it's like, but think about that. 3 questions in, because we're all audience members of whatever content we consume, right? And what happens? We listen, not hooked, boom, change, right? Maybe you give it 30 seconds, maybe you give it a minute, maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Look at stats. It drops precipitously like a rock off a cliff. So she always said 3 questions in, if they're no good, drop them. I mean, that to me, she told me, I heard that like 10 years ago. It never, ever left me. So here's something interesting. Like there's also, if they're boring, let them go. Funny's money, right? That's a radio saying. So if you make people smile, you make them laugh, it's money, it's gold, it's eyeballs, it's advertising, it's whatever. A few things you can do. Throw out a crazy stat to get a reaction. Now again, whatever the topic is, throw out something that you purposely know is underballing them. Underestimating them a little bit. And what they're going to do, because it's ego, like, oh no, we're in 25 states. Oh, I thought you were only in 5 states. Oh no. Because again, it's back and forth. Don't be afraid to push buttons a little bit. This one's a little tricky. You can't do this with every guest. Start an argument. Because some guests will poop the bed. They won't know what to do. I'm serious, they won't. But if you have, you can't be afraid of controversy because, you know, what do people tune in for? Okay, sex, relationships, money. Those are the three biggest topics, podcasts and radio. Okay, but you can have boring versions of, you know, sex, relationships, and finance. It doesn't matter. So don't be afraid to start an argument. Don't be afraid to push them, to challenge them, because then you're going to get a good interview. Not every, now here's something, and it's something I had a hard time learning. Your job is not always to make them look great. Your job is to create a great interview. And honestly, I had a hard time with that. And this is something I've been working on, you know, stirring up the, you know, overturning the apple cart, whatever the saying is, okay? And you don't know where that'll take you, and that's the fun part.
The key word I listen to on that one is when you say just. I started a business, you know, it was just kind of easy because I, you know, fell into it. It's like just. Nothing is just. There is some pain you went through in order to do that. So that's an easy start an argument without being without really being confrontational about it. But you're calling them out on how easy it really was to go out and do something. Just.
Oh, am I supposed to talk?
That was I looked at. Yeah, I figured I'd, you know, hand it over to you.
Okay. Yes, but.
Yes, and. Well, yes, but.
No,
yes,
it's
but's
yes
an
and.
argument.
No, yes, but ends it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another improv thing.
Okay. We took an improv class together a number of years ago.
Yes. Going back to boring is boring.
No, by the way, seriously, the reason I took it, because again, my business, I do sales system consulting, training, and coaching, right? So I'm always presenting. Improv comedy. Has anybody taken an improv comedy course? You have.
Yeah, now you're talking.
If wherever you can do it, do it. It is one of the best investments in communication because it gets you out of being scripted and regimented, and it allows you to be present in the moment, as we've all heard. It allows you to be present in the conversation, right? Would you agree with?
100%.
Yeah.
You got to be able to think and speak at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, and that becomes it. And you're just there. You just have to be there. That goes back to your comment about, well, if I'm going to edit the show, then that question, I could reword the question. That means you're not listening. Now you're judging whatever the answer is.
Yeah.
Forget about judging the answer. Just take that answer you got and go with it. So, no, you know, no editing. Oh, no. But you just stay totally, you know, in the moment. Very important. And if something goes wrong, even better. That becomes the fun. Live event's a little bit easier on that one. But if guy was giving a presentation, so somebody's leaning against the wall, turn the lights out. Man, it was the greatest thing in the world. Why? Because all of a sudden everybody kind of woke up. What happened? Now they're focused on something, and he immediately got them back over there. Woke everybody up. If a conversation, an interview is going boring, and you can make the guest laugh, well, then you got to assume that the audience is laughing. You can't see it, but all of a sudden, you know, they come right back into it. And then on a live audience, you ask a question to get everybody back in on the whole thing. But yeah, you do anything that's a little bit different than the standard 20 questions you're asking somebody, that's good. It's an attention grabber, and it's really important to do. You know, if you're doing any kind of a podcast, radio show, whatever it is. A little bit more fun if you're doing TV, where you got the visual that goes along with it. Yeah. What things can go wrong.
I just, as you were talking, Brian, I had a recollection. I interviewed a few Jets fans, of which I'm one. I don't want to bring us down with Jets talk right now, but I did interview Marty Lyons. If any of you know, he was a Jets legend back in the day with the Sack Exchange. And I interviewed him a couple of years back. Great guy. I had him on, and he went to Alabama in college, and he's big on the Marty Lyons Foundation, which helps children who are sick and, you know, providing wishes. So we talked about business, we talked about football, all of that. And I asked him a question. I don't remember the exact question, but it was a question about one of the kids that he had referenced in a book that, you know, he's helped thousands of kids, but there's one in particular. And I got this guy to choke up on air. And, you know, this big lumbering dude who makes me look like, you know, a 6-year-old standing next to him with hands like, you know, the size of catcher's mitts. Yeah. And he even said, and like he had to clear his throat. And I just let it go. It's like, oh, it was beautiful. So it kind of gets back to, not that I was trying to start an argument, but again, it's being genuine, and it's not being afraid to push the envelope, because that's when you're going to get gold. Because, you have to remember there's so many podcasts out there, and so many become formulaic, and this, that, and the other. And to your point, you said earlier, they're not here for me, but they are. Because you're the guy who brings the guests. You're the guy who's allowing them to hear topics and interviews that they're passionate about. So the host plays a critical role. So, and another part of this is let your personality out as the host. And I personally have had a hard time with it. You know, some hosts are certainly really, really good at it. And people can sense, you know, when you're being genuine. And it's an important thing.
What you say in those first two items there?
Yeah.
Kind of enforces how important the research piece is, because you wouldn't really, you have more material to go on with better research that you do for your guests, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
You have a set amount of time, I mean, I'm sure every guest varies, but you said you read snippets of their books.
yeah.
You look at podcasts, any other sources that you would go to beyond that, or that gives you enough material, I guess?
For me,
Yeah.
I mean, because think about it. If you watch a guest on somebody else's podcast for 10 minutes, you know exactly what they're going to be.
Yeah, and let's talk reality here too. It's not like we got this research team or anything like that. You know, I walk into my, you know, I do it from home, mostly, you know, I'm doing it from home. I turn on the button and away we go, you know, as that goes. There's no staff or no nothing, anything like that. I'm just hoping the dog doesn't bark altogether too loud. You know, he's walking into a studio setting, you know, doing the whole thing, right? But it's him. He's doing all the research and all the rest of that stuff that goes along with it, you know. So no. And then so how much time do you put into it? It depends. He's interviewing people, and I find this to be an interesting thing, right? I interview people, I'm asking about their stuff. I don't know anything about their stuff, so I don't have to be anybody. Jim, if you're doing it, you have to know motorcycles. That's the world you come from. So you have to have an expertise in there. You know, Tim's doing, you know, the Profit Express. You know, he's involved with sales. That's what he does for a living. So there's got to be some level of expertise, you know, that goes along with it. So some of the research you would kind of know because you know the industry. But he's got to come across a little bit differently. So you definitely put more effort into the research side of things.
But it's also personality. Because listen, so you've been hearing me, the Tim and Brian show, for an hour and 18 minutes so far. I think everybody can determine my personality versus Brian's personality, right? We're just different. We're wired different.
I'm more fun.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I gave you that one. Come on now.
I-
Yeah, no, I'm more
Let's
A-type.
start
I'm
an argument over it
research.
if
I'm
you want.
prepared.
Don't talk over me.
He's like, just, hey, let's see what's going to happen today. Hey, let's talk to somebody outside on the street. It's awesome. It's fantastic. You know, there's no right or wrong. I think we can learn from one another. So as you guys become hosts with your own shows, know who you are. Know your personality.
So I'm trying to be more inspirational in that show, right? So I'm hoping, I expect, you know, to get this into high school students to see what it's like to really, truly work in in various careers as that goes. He's talking to successful salespeople that want to take it to the next level. It's different. I could mess around a heck of a lot more on mine than he can. And if I'm interviewing people at a trade show or something like that, and it's live, there is no seriousness, you know, about the whole thing. It's just totally, you know, off the cuff, you know, as you're going about doing it. So what is your personality? What are you trying to accomplish? It all goes back to that. What are you trying to be? If you're trying to be the expert in your field, you know, you keep that joking around to a minimal. If you're looking to find other people that have accomplished great things, you better keep that thing light, funny, but definitely inspirational.
How do you feel about co-hosting? Because that's kind of what you're doing right now. Do you have thoughts? Do you have like opinions on?
Hold on a second. Who's doing a better? No. And then
Do you have opinions on shows that have co-hosts?
Well, yeah. I mean, listen. There's a lot of them where they have. I mean, that's what today's media does. They do it in sports. There's rarely a one-show host. There's a panel in sports. There's a panel in politics. Will there have 3, 4, sometimes 5? You know, like again, it's personality. I'm too much. My ego and ask my wife. I'm a control freak. So, you know, me handing over the reins to a co-host, it would be tough for me. Again, personality. And if you find the right person, it could be great. you know?
And everybody's got to stay in their lane. You know, they stay in the lane.
I don't worry about the lane. We don't have to color within, color within the lines kind of thing. We can have,
No, but there's different
Yeah.
focuses people have. When we spoke to them about, about doing this thing about how to podcast and stuff like that, I thought Tim would be a great person to do it with for a number of reasons, good friend, all the rest of that kind of stuff. But his approach to podcasting is different than mine. He walks into, I think you've always, mostly at least, walked into his studio and did it in a studio setting. I used to do something 4 minutes before. I held up the phone and did that. Big time difference, when it comes to that thing. Guests tend to be more professionals that have accomplished different things, written books. Not too many of the guests that I've had over the years that, have written books, wanted to write books, but not written books. So his approach to interviewing, the kind of people, the structure of the whole thing, different than mine. I'm not going to tell you I don't have a structure to what I do. I know where I want to go with the whole thing. But you can't have much of a structure if you're just interviewing people you've never met before other than 3 seconds because someone's pulling you along. Hey, that's the next person to go and do. I also do mine for, either live or I set up a studio at home, that kind of thing. I don't recall the last time I went into a formal studio to do anything. It tends to be that way. So we have totally different approaches to accomplish the same thing. Now, using the studio that they have over here at the library, the Miller Business Center, that's great. It's a little different than what I've done before. I wanted to, once I found out about it, wanted to use it. I've done voiceovers. It needed to be in a better microphone, better room, the soundproof thing. That became different to me. But it's totally different as to what we're doing. Now, without knowing who the audience is going to be, what you're trying to do you want to be a host? Do you want to be a guest? Do you have no clue in the world? You want to be more off the cuff, more formal, structure. It's great to have him here. This would have been a nice intro. He's great to have him here because we're totally different. I like the guy. But it's important. But we still have different spaces. So to answer your question, there was a question there about half an hour ago, right?
But to the point structure.
It depends where you're at. I did another show at co-host.
But to the point structure, so since I'm the structure guy, we got like 8 or 9 minutes. I'm not rushing anybody out. But questions, thoughts, comments, that's what we're here for. Anybody? I know we've been asking.
There's another slide after this.
Is there?
Yeah.
There probably is. Cause
would you like to see it?
Yeah.
Is it my picture?
There might be. I forgot if I had some. Oh, great point. Your name, I'm sorry?
Lavania.
Lavania.
I got it written down.
Her name?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a reference if I got it.
Here's one very important thing. No matter how many people listen to your show, right, and I hope it's tons and tons, and no doubt will be tons, you're always speaking to you. And that's why, are you interested? Just that it's a simple thing, but it's always one person, because that's one person's listening. They don't care that it might be another million people. It's them. They've decided to tune in. So just remember that.
Same thing with a live audience, by the
let me
way.
ask, for Lavania's question, I don't know. If there isn't another slide, I apologize. I didn't mean to disappoint. So throw out a crazy reaction, argument, funny is money, boring is boring. Yeah, that was it. Sorry. Damn. Yes, the suspense. Yes.
Question. If you're, like the gentleman here, if you're doing a podcast where you're just really sharing your expertise, how do you get the content to keep going with that?
Oh, you're going to hate this answer. So again, I was doing this thing I did for a couple of years, around like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I would walk into the living room at 5 minutes to 1, I'd ask my wife, hey, what should I talk about? And she's like, how do I know? I go back in the room, turn the camera on, and then start going.
I would shoot myself if I had to do that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
But it's top of mind. So in my case, it was top of mind. Whatever was kind of going on. I don't talk current events, politics, whatever. Yeah, I shouldn't say that. It would be more current events, not politics and that kind of thing. So whatever was on the top of my mind is what I spoke about.
But that could be a great format, though. Because if it's interesting and fun, people will tune in, they'll listen. It doesn't matter, But to your point, to your question, so if you are in the point of, I don't know, if you're about to launch the podcast, we start off today saying who has a podcast, who wants to start a podcast. So the folks had various levels of, where they are on the journey. Here's one very important thing, because we didn't talk a lot about it, but content. Like my general manager at the radio station said, he's like, can you do this every week? Because I do a show 3 times a month. I don't always get 4 times in, right? It's not easy. And I don't want to depress anybody. It is what it is. So start with a shorter show, 5, 10 minutes. Take pressure off yourself. Get used to it, right? Build up to it. Build up your endurance. But before you launch anything, think of the date, think of the time, Thursdays at 2, whenever it is. Don't deviate, because your audience will expect it. I'm every Wednesday, boom, right? And have, I would say, at least half a dozen shows in the can, done, content done, because before you start recording anything. Because if you do one and then you go through all of the recording and like, oh, I got to do another one, it's like psychological, like you won't get out of bed. So have the shows, no, I'm serious, have the shows lined up, have the content lined up, all ready to go, and then you can start recording. Because if you're doing one at a time, it's tough.
That's what I was going to ask you about batch creation. Do you have a certain time frame? Like, do you do 6, like month 1, and then you're good, and then month 2 you're doing the next 6 that follow that? Like, what is your rhythm of production?
I need to get better at it because it takes time, because my format is long. Yeah. So in the studio, I could really do like two interviews in the time allotted, but for me, because if I do my minimum show is like a half hour, the one last week was 52 minutes. Me personally, I don't have anything else for a second interview. My brain is shot. That's me. You know, some people, if you do a shorter format, you can bang out a couple in one setting.
Let's answer why you're doing it. And just to be clear, that half-hour thing that I was doing, it was during COVID, the rest of that kind of stuff, and I needed to stay relevant out there. Remember, I'm that speaking guy. And it's like, I wasn't going to events. None of us were going to events or anything like that. So when people ask me, what is it about? Why do I do it? Because I tell them, I was bored. Flat out, I was bored. And I needed to speak to somebody. So I was happy speaking to that little red light. And that was it. So that was what I was trying to accomplish on the whole thing. So now going back to how many times you do it, how much do you have in a can, how many do you have recorded, the rest of that stuff. If you're doing, going back to that, an insurance guy, if you over the next month, write down questions that your clients are asking, whatever your industry is, and that kind of thing. And then you want to go out on a weekly basis with little tidbits of information, your Tuesday talk. You go down, you can go use the podcast room over here. You could use it twice a month. It's all free. It's all complimentary. Not free, it's complimentary. It's great, the rest of that stuff. And then go down there. You can record as many as you can in that amount of time. You can do 52 of them if you want over the course of a month. Edit out the ones you don't like. You do a couple over again, that kind of thing. You'd have 52 of them. You're done for the year. Just flat out done for the year if they're generic kind of questions that are not time-sensitive type things, right? So do that evergreen. Don't use time frame, in there when you're doing it. And then you're done. And then that's, my world at least, that's easy.
There was another question?
Yeah,
go ahead.
A question around AI and use of AI for ideas, like if your target audience is insurance people.
Yeah.
Or maybe not insurance people, maybe homeowners with, whatever that niche is.
Yeah.
And using AI and prompting it and keep prompting it and getting better response, like for that target audience to give me 10 ideas to write about, 20 ideas,
Yeah.
40, 52 ideas.
Yeah.
And then just get the ideas, and then all of a sudden, 40 of them may be bad, but you get 12 good
Yeah,
ones.
they
So
germinate, yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just figured I'd throw that
Oh,
out.
sometimes you squeeze the brain, nothing, for me, nothing's coming out.
Yep.
ChatGPT helps it out, Whoa, wow, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Fantastic,
Agreed.
There's two other, any questions, comments, thoughts? Sir?
I'm just going to say,
Yeah.
Perplexity is one that I find really interesting, but I don't know. Just sharing that. A very, very fun AI tool that actually lists all.
Oh, the actual tool itself.
The actual tool, it's called
Perplexity. Okay, thank you for sharing.
Just for,
Yeah.
FYI.
I know last week they talked about there's many different options for who you send your podcast out with.
Yeah.
Is there one particular that you guys use?
You're saying like Spotify, iTunes?
No, when you actually, like, if you come here to the studio and
Right.
you use your complimentary time and you record, they said, you still have to use somebody to put the podcast out
Yeah.
there. I forget the name of, there was a bunch of names.
The platform?
Like a platform to get it out to Spotify. It's still like that.
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah. I use Blueberry. I mean, there's a ton out there. Lipsis is another one a friend of mine uses. that I have an assistant who puts it out there for me as far as, because I'm on YouTube as well as all the podcaster, pod chasers, whatever the heck they call it, Spotify, blah, 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 blah. But one that I use is Blueberry. So it's because you're going to leave the library with content, a file, a show. Then you have to distribute it.
Right,
So
they were saying so.
the Blueberry is a platform will then take it and then shoot it out for you.
Yeah, it's a multitude of different places.
Yeah, there's a lot of
And
options.
I'll go back to why you're doing it, right? So the show I wanted to know what I'm doing, I got started doing over here. I got it on Cablevision. Huh? Got to learn how to edit, so it's got to be 30 minutes. Whatever, that's whatever challenge. Kind of editing it to exactly 30 minutes. But the place I want to put it is on the website we have called Career Map LI, which is about careers, and I want to get that website in front of the high school students. So I don't really care if it goes out on Spotify or whatever. I don't really care if, there's a whole bunch of people listening outside of the folks on Long Island, because it's really about the Long Island careers, and that kind of thing. So I want to get in front of the business people, this way I get guests, but I want it on that website. So my thing is not so much as getting the show out there, it's getting that website into the high schools. It's a different approach. So where do you want to go? Well, what do you want to do? His show, it doesn't make a difference where it is that you're listening to the whole thing, where the audience is across the board. So, it's a wider distribution. It's much more important to him than it is to me.
Sir, question?
Yeah, so I came in because I knew nothing about podcasts.
Cool.
So if podcast is a conversation, it seems like there's a lot of similarities between radio shows and talk shows.
Yeah.
What platform would be more technical, like how to? Like this gentleman, he's talking about motorcycles. If he wanted to study how to ride a motorcycle, right? Would that be a YouTube channel? Like what's the difference in terms of your audience?
Well, so podcasting can go a few ways. Podcasting can be straight up audio, right? And then mine is audio video. So I'm on YouTube and then I'm on iTunes, which is just audio. But so you're saying if somebody's content is more specific,
Yeah, more technical, like more how to.
that YouTube will be a great platform for that if you have the visual element.
Yeah, so you're showing how to do something?
Yeah, I guess if somebody's saying, how do I downshift? How do I?
Yeah, if
Then
I'm a
you want the
mechanic
video
or,
side of
yeah,
it.
how to. Yeah, then obviously YouTube is hugely powerful for that.
Right. So I'm looking to, I want the visual side of it too. So what is it like to work at one of the defense contractors? Well, you know what, we could talk about it, well, you could see it. Much more impactful to see it, as that goes. Which goes to the whole thing too. Do you do a podcast just audio or visual? It depends, if that visual is telling the story, or do you have a guest in studio or outside of studio, right? If you do it with a guest inside the studio over here, it's a nice room, the sound is great, and all the rest of that stuff. There's no personality to the room. It's just you and the content. If I'm interviewing somebody, and I do it through YouTube, and they're at their location, and I interview XYZ shop, they now have their logo and all the rest of that stuff over there. It tells their story. And also I'm doing it from my place, it tells my story. And when he does it at the studio he's using, it also is more of a generic thing, because that's not the story. The story is the guest, not so much as that side of it. So that's a big part of it. Why are you doing it? That why you're doing answers so many of these different things. Are you having a guest or not? Are you sharing your expertise, or are you trying to get somebody else to share their thoughts on whatever the industry is? Are you trying to tell the story visually as much? Like, for Jim with the motorcycle stuff like that, you're interviewing across the nation, have the conversation with them. Make sure you got the logo. Make sure you got a motorcycle up in the back, or whatever, banners or anything like that. Any of that kind of stuff. If it's just words, which is fine, if it's just, the weekly tidbit of information, and it's just a message you want to deliver out where you want people to contact you or go to your website, well, then you don't need the visual that goes along with it. But if you can, you do. But if you're going to put it on Spotify and the rest of those things, for the most part, that's just audio alone. So think about that.
Before we lose folks, not a reflection on you, I'm just saying time.
It happens. We'll edit that part out.
No,
we don't
please
edit.
keep that
That's
one in.
right,
That's good.
we don't edit.
That's a good soundbite right there. I'll hang out. You guys have to leave. You have to leave. Great. We'll stick around. Any other? Because questions typically.
One more quick one.
Sure.
When you say you go to YouTube, is YouTube the in your
Yeah.
studio.
Yeah.
So you don't do anything above and beyond that. You put the same thing to YouTube. It's just a video if you do it.
Yeah, like Spotify, you could do video as well. iTunes is just audio, you know, and Amazon and a few others, just audio, depends.
So you record yourself and you just let it go out either audio or visual depending on the place where it lands?
Well, the platform determines that. Yeah, it's recorded audio, video.
So that they can decide?
Right.
Right. But if you're
Exactly.
relying on the video side of telling that story,
Yeah.
you know, like I did it, I was showing pictures and stuff like that. You can't see pictures if, you don't have that whole thing, so, keep that in mind.
I'll say one last thing. Thank you
Thank you,
Oh,
man.
Thank you.
for
Thanks
sharing
to
your
everybody,
time.
too.
If you guys, I don't know how close you all are to the podcasting journey. Is it a lot of work? Yes. Is it rewarding? Yes. The two topics that I heard of are very niche. There's riches in the niches. No, I'm serious. Don't forget that. Trying to broadcast nowadays is not a good approach. Very specific, great ideas. Start today. Do something today. Don't put it off. And then don't forget to come to part 3. Sal, thank you for having us. Awesome series here today. And a great resource. Yes.